What's going on, everyone? It's Elias here at the Rainy Forge. Welcome back. Sorry it's been so long. Hopefully you checked out my new video and my new series in the workshop. If you haven't yet, go ahead and check that out once you're done watching this one. Awesome, cool new things happening here at the Forge, but today it's a nice, lovely, rainy October morning, and I've got an awesome commission piece that I'm dying to get working on, so let's just jump right into it. Alright, so for today, I met a guy named Matt at the Purple Painted Lady Festival, and I've actually been going to his food truck for more than 7 years now, and I never realized it because I never really met the guy. And his food truck is called Meatball Truck here out of Rochester. They serve the best truffle fries in the world. I get them every year I do the Purple Painted Lady Festival, and of course their meatballs are to die for. It is the Meatball Truck after all. But anyways, Matt came over and introduced himself to me, and we got talking, and he wanted a knife made. And he does a lot of hunting and bushcrafting, and he had this amazing antler that he got this last hunting season. For any of you guys that hunt, if you want a custom knife with a custom antler handle from something that you got or a shed that you found, please reach out to me and I'll make a knife for you, just like this awesome knife that we're going to make today. So I have this knife with me at the festival, and this guy is currently still available over on my website. Let you guys check that out here real quick. Just an awesome little Skinner bushcraft knife. Has that awesome little Skinner's tip. If you're not familiar, the idea behind a Skinner's tip is you don't want something super pointy so that when you puncture through your hide, you don't get into the meat and the guts and all the fun stuff. So you just get through that hide with that little Skinner's tip and slide right down your hide. So, in any case, he saw this knife sitting at my table, and he really liked the shape of it, but he wanted that antler handle instead of a full tang knife here. So, what we're going to do is we're going to take this piece of antler, we're going to cut it down to size, we're going to cut this little tine off right here, sand it down, and then add a little bit of leather dye to keep things nice and looking good so we don't have just a little white circle right there. And we're going to make a pretty awesome knife with this knife shape. And we're also going to use a brass guard, and this whole knife is going to be absolutely freaking kick-ass. So, what's first? So to start out, I have this big bar of W2 steel. We're going to be making this knife out of W2 so I can give it a nice, awesome hamon line. Now, I get the best hamon lines with W2, but I can also pull a pretty good hamon line off a 1095. But I've got some 1092, I've got the right thickness, so we're going to go with this stuff. Now the first thing I'm going to have to do is forge out my tang. And I'm eventually going to end up curving that tang so it fits nicely in the deer antler handle. And it goes as far to the end as I can without punching through. And so what I'm going to have to do is basically the same concept and the same principle as forging out a tip of a knife. Now, if I were to go and take this piece of steel and just start hammering on it like that, on the anvil on the end, heating it up, of course, what I would get is called fish lips. And my tip, or in this case my tang, would wind up looking something like that. And we don't want that, because that needs to get ground out and removed in the final process. And it also leads to cold shuts. When those two sides get close together and they don't weld, we get what's called a cold shut, and it's ugly and it's nasty. We really, really don't want that. So to avoid fish lips, what we got to do is we got to put our bar of steel on the horn of the anvil and hit it with a rounded hammer on the top while it's on the horn of the anvil. And what that will do is it will give us this nice curved bump out before we go and hammer out our tang or our tip. And so what that does with physics, when you have that bump out and you go and you apply pressure on both sides of the knife, that pushes that tip into a nice triangle instead of fish lips. So that's what we're going to do here. And I'm going to start with forging out the tang to make sure I have enough material. I know I have plenty of material for the blade, but I really want to make sure I have enough material for the tang first. So that's what we're going to do. So like I said, we're going to use the horn of the anvil here. Make sure you flatten it out as you go. And I'm going to switch over to my other hammer here. It's got a little bit more of a rounded face to it. So you really want to curve both sides as you go, so you get that bump out. So that's basically what we're looking for. So I'm going to heat it up again, and we'll start forging that tang out. Now you want to make sure you go equal on both sides. So a couple hits, flatten everything out. Alright, so I've got this line here, and I want to make sure that I'm forging my tang out to that length from here. So we've got a lot of work to do. Alright, I've got this tang forged out to about 3/4 of the way there. And so now what I'm doing, as you can see, I'm putting a little shelf on that tang. And the way I'm doing that is using my hammer along with the corner of the anvil here to really get that shelf. And you just want to go slow. Make sure you're keeping things nice and even. And the hotter your steel is, the easier it is to move, which means I can focus on being precise with my hammer strikes and not have to put as much power to move the steel. So there's my 6 inches where I want it. And it's already got a little bit of a curve in there, but I'm actually not going to curve it to shape yet. I still have to cut my antler piece down to figure out exactly what shape I want to go with. And then I'm going to get the guard prepped, and we're also going to have a little bit of spacer wood that's going to go right about here as well. And I want to get all of that set before I put the curve in here. So next thing I got to do is to work on the blade. Now I'm not going to go right into forging the blade. I'm actually going to let this piece of metal cool down, and I'm going to go to my angle grinder and we're going to cut the length that I need for my blade and start that tip so I don't have to forge it out. Now this knife is going to be nice and clean, like our sample knife here. And the easiest way to do that is to leave as few forge marks in there as possible. And so the way that I'm going to do that is to first get that kind of that tip shape that I want there and cut that out rather than try and forge it out. And that's going to make my whole life a lot easier over at the grinder. So as I said, we're going to stick this guy back in the forge, let it cool down and anneal, and then go over and cut our shape. Alright, so it is day 2 and I have let this knife sit in the forge overnight and anneal. I wanted to make sure she's nice and soft because we're going to be doing a lot of grinding here to get a beautiful little right angle shelf for our guard. We're going to go with a nice little ovular guard, and we want to make sure that it sits nice and flush here so it doesn't wiggle at all and there's no big gaps between the guard and the steel. So the best way to do that is to take it over to my angle grinder and cut in on this side and then cut in on this side and then cut down, have those nice little right angles there, and then go through with the file and just clean everything up. So I'm going to go ahead and do that first, and then we'll jump right over into making a guard. Alright, so I've got my knife, and I went ahead and cut that tine off my antler and cut it down to the size that I want. Fits really nice in the hand. And now we're going to figure out our guard. So I've got a piece of brass here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this up with the tang of my knife, and I want to first get the width of the blade. I'm just going to do a little mark here and here. So there's the width of the tang, and now we want to figure out the width of the blade. So with our handle here, if we line that up with our knife, and we can see it sticks out quite a bit on either side, and we don't want that. So what we're going to have to do with this knife is we're going to want to shave it down just a smidge. And we'll do this between the forging process and eventually the grinder. And there's also going to be a nice choil right here. So that's kind of what our knife's going to look like here when we're done with it. And that's going to look a little bit cleaner, a little bit better on the antler, so the top doesn't stick out as far and everything looks good. I think I'm also going to put a little bit of a spacer wood between the antler and the handle, because I want the tang of the knife to be thicker up here. So if I leave this thicker right here on the tang, that gives me a lot more material for the structure of the knife, and if it gets used for chopping or anything at all, that's going to be your big tension point, is right here, right where you have that big gap between the wide blade and the thinner tang. So if I'm able to keep this nice and thick right here, that will prevent any kind of snapping that might happen with the tang. And then I can actually go through and grind and get this tang a lot thinner down here and taper it off so it fits nicely in my deer antler without having to take too much material out of the antler. So with that being said, we're going to go back over to our brass here, knowing that that's going to be our width. And we want to make sure that our guard sticks out a pretty good amount on both sides around the knife. Like I said, we're going to do a nice little oval shape here. And I believe that's going to give us a good amount of material right there. So I could go through and just freehand, freehand an oval, freehand a teardrop shape here. But that's not going to turn out great. So we're going to do a little trick. Alright, so here's the trick if you're like me and you don't really have a lot of precision equipment, but you want to get a super nice, even, clean guard that is nice and symmetrical. And it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. The way to do it, you take your bar, put it on some paper, and you probably can already figure out where I'm going from here. So with this guard, I want the top to be just a little bit smaller than the bottom, so we're going to give ourselves probably about this much material. And I can use my bar as a straight edge. And we're just going to go ahead and cut this out. And fold that in half, make everything nice and even. Then I'm going to grab my wood cutting surface here, take my leather knife, and just score the edge, because I want to make sure that this is super nice and even, flush, and clean. I'm going to take a pen, and we're going to go ahead and draw my rounded edges on the top and the bottom. And then when we go and we cut those, just like if you ever made paper snowflakes when you were a kid, same concept. When you open the paper up, you'll have a nice even shape on both sides. And I know it's simple, but it's one of those things where, like, if you're just not thinking about it and not thinking and doing it, and you just freehand your guard and it turns out really ugly and you have to spend a lot of time on the grinder making everything even, this is just so much easier and quicker. So there is a nice, perfect, symmetrical, even guard. And we're just gonna line that up on our piece of brass here. And then take a Sharpie, give it a mark. And I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to find the center of this bar. These are 1 inch wide, so just go to my 1/2 inch mark. And then I'm going to scribe a line all the way down the center. And so that's going to be our center line, and that's very important when we go to mill out our space here for the tang. And again, I've got my my little cross hatches here where I know how wide to go, the top and the bottom of the tang. So now we'll just hop over to my end mill and mill out that slot. So you can always remove more material, but you can almost never add more material. And you never want to just have to do the whole guard over again. So the best thing to do when you're milling out a slot for a guard, if you have an end mill, start small and go big. So I'm starting with a milling bit that's a lot smaller than the tang of my knife. So if my mill wiggles at all in the process of milling this out, I'm going to a bigger milling bit anyway, so that's okay and that's fine. And then when I go over to the bigger milling bit, there's enough material removed already that it will be less likely to want to rotate or move back and forward and mess up that nice clean slot line. The bottom of the guard will always be cleaner than the top, so the bottom of the guard will be what faces out and the top will be what's sandwiched between the handle and the guard. So there we go. There's our slot. And I know for a fact it's not going to fit on the tang yet because it's too thin. So like I said, we're going to go over to my bigger milling bit and do that process again. Alright, I've filed that down so my guard slides on there nice and sits nice and clean and flush with no gaps. So the next step I got to do before we go back into the forge is to start taking material out of our handle. So when we go back in the forge, I can bend my tang to the shape of my handle and then hot fit it in there. Now I don't usually do that with wood, and you don't really want to do it with wood because it creates a lot of char on the inside, and your epoxy doesn't like sticking to the char very well, and you have a chance of the handle coming off. But with Antler, I find that I don't have that problem, and I still have a lot of material in there to get really good grip on, and I can go ahead and burn the tang in there, which honestly is really the only good method to do with an Antler handle. So I got my drill bit, and I've got it set. If you can see, I've got a black mark right there, so I know how deep to go, so I don't blow through the side of it. And we're just going to take some material out. There's my depth. Go just a little bit more. And then because this handle is curved, we're just going to have to kind of go at an angle here with the drill bit. Tighten my vise here. And just go at an angle and just make sure I don't blow through the side. Go really slow. And just get as much material out as I can. I'm not going to be able to get the tang all the way to the bottom of it, but I will go as far as I can and just be very careful not to blow through the side. So one of the things that you want to do once you get in a certain depth is just mark on your drill bit how far in you are and line it up, and that will tell you how close you are to blowing out through the side. So I'm right about to the curve of my antler here. So I've drilled right about to here, and that's really as far as I can go because I don't want to blow out the side here. So I'm just going to go to another drill bit that's smaller and try and get a little bit further in there so I can get that tang about 3/4 of the way down on the handle. And then after that, we're going to go ahead and cut out our blade shape here and hop right on over to the forge. Alright, so here is the shape that we're going to try and get to. I've already got the rounded front and the tip cut out on our knife. And so the first thing we're going to do is take that bar, turn it on the back, and hit it right here on the horn of the anvil. So there's that curve. Now we're going to do the same thing but flip it and hit the bottom and get that curve on the bottom. And I'm going to actually grab it from the top here so I get a little bit more leverage. You can see we're starting to get that curve there. And heat it back up. Keep working it. Flatten this out. Alright, I'm just going to straighten everything out. And heat it back up and we'll start working on hammering out our bevel. I've got a little bit too much of a curve going on here. So to straighten that out, throw this back in the forge and get it heated up. And then I'm going to hit it with a wooden hammer. Alright, I've got that shape forged out about where I want it. It's definitely going to be a bit of work on the grinder to really get that nice swoop and the really nice Skinner's tip going there. But I've got basically where I want it, and we'll just clean everything up and make it look perfect on the grinder. But the next step is to heat up this tang, and we're going to burn it into our deer antler handle so everything fits nice and snug. So we'll throw this back in the forge. And I want to just get down to the little shelf that I made. Right about there. And that's going to do it. Now I'm just going to tap this handle off. So now that she fits nice and tight and everything's good, we'll throw the whole knife back in the forge, bring it back up to temperature, and let it anneal. And we'll get to grinding. Alright, knife has been left to anneal for a couple hours, and I already went ahead and knocked off all that forge scale. I've talked about before with forge scale on knives, you want to clean all that off with your wire wheel before you go over to your big grinder, just because all the forge scale that's on there is actually really hard, and it'll break down your grinding belts really quick and really easily. So I like to just knock all that off on my wire wheel first. But so there we are with the knife, and before we continue work on here, I've got a little special someone here that wants to introduce himself and be part of the video. So Matt, over to you.
How you doing? My name is Matt. I own food trucks, and yeah, I'm having this knife made up for me because it's a special deer, and I knew Eli here could take care of it. We met at a festival, and from there we started working on it. So, you know, learning a lot in the process.
Absolutely, absolutely. Meatball truck, my favorite truck at the Purple Painted Lady Festival. I always go and get the truffle fries. I've been there for years, and then you finally came over and said something, and I'm like, holy shit, it's the truffle fry guy.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, the Meatball truck is a great company. I started about 11 years ago, and we're out of Rochester, New York, and we sell meatballs and a lot of cool other things. So I'm glad you like it, so we could combine it, and now Eli's got a piece of his work with us. So yeah,
absolutely.
Super
Hell yeah,
excited.
brother.
Yeah, man.
All right, well, thanks again for the commission, and
yeah, for sure.
Thanks for being on the video here.
Yeah, man. Anytime.
Shout out. And do you have anything I want to link for you in the description?
We're at Meatball Truck Co. at Instagram, Facebook, and we don't have a website, but yeah, just hit us up on Instagram and Facebook, and we post where we are in the area. And who knows, we could pretty much go anywhere from Buffalo to Syracuse to Rochester.
There you go. That's a pretty good distance. All right. Well, if any of you guys are local, links to all that will be in the description below. And thanks again, Matt. And let's get to grinding.
Right, let's do this.
Alright, so I've got this knife all nice and ground. Nice tall bevel. I took her up to 60 grit. No reason to go any more than that. I want a little something for the furnace cement to grab onto when we go to do the hamon line on this knife. And also, if you go anything more than this, you end up usually grinding back to 120 anyway, just to get all that forge scale off and to keep your higher grit belts intact as long as possible. So the first thing that we're going to do before we move over to the hamon line is to put some gimping on the spine. So if you're unfamiliar with what gimping is, here's a knife that I made, and this guy has some gimping on the spine. So if you can see that, there's little grooves right here on the top of the spine. And what those do is not only is it aesthetically pleasing, gives some character to the knife, they also act as a little bit of a grip for your thumb. Now when you go to cut something, if you don't have a finger on the back of your knife and you just drag the knife, you don't really get the greatest of a cut. In fact, this is some not super thick leather, and I'm not even able to get like halfway through it just by dragging the knife. So the force behind your cut actually comes from a finger on the spine. In this case, I'm going to use my pointer finger here just to demonstrate, and we're really going to put pressure on the back of the spine and then drag, and that helps me get a lot more force with my cut, and sure enough, we're able to sever that leather nice and easily. And so what the gimping does is, whether it's your pointer finger, your thumb, or however you have on the spine of the knife there, gives you a little bit of a grip so you don't slide on either side of the knife, and as I said, it's also very pretty. So we're going to go ahead and put some gimping on the spine of our knife here. So I'm going to go ahead and clamp her in to my vise. Make sure she doesn't wiggle. And then I'm going to take a Sharpie, because I want to make sure I have nice straight lines when I go to do my gimping. And I'm going to give myself about 3/16 of an inch from where the guard's going to be. Put my first line. And then I'm going to take my triangle file here. And I'm going to make sure I have just the edge down here. And I'm going to angle it just slightly. Give us a nice little triangle there. So you can see that's how it looks like on the face of the knife. And you can kind of see how it looks on the spine of the knife. So now I'm going to go ahead and clamp it back in my vise here. And I'm going to go ahead and do basically the same thing right next to it. And then give myself a matching triangle here and throw my file across the room. So that's what we're looking like here on the face and on the spine. So we've got that nice double triangle going on, and I'm going to go ahead and copy that on the other side of the knife. And then we're going to do a couple more of those going all the way down the spine, probably about just before halfway, just before this little curve here starts. So somewhere in here. So here's all the gimping done, and the next little texture piece that I'm going to add to this, I'm going to grab my Dremel tool here, and I have a little bit on here, and we're going to put a little bit of texture on here. now we'll switch the knife over and just match it on the other side. So if you've watched any of my other videos, you've probably seen me do a Hamon line before. Now the way that we do a Hamon line is we apply furnace cement, in this case it's called satinite, to the spine of the knife before we send her in for heat treatment. And what that does is it leaves the edge of your knife nice and hard and durable, but the spine of the knife is a bit softer, which gives your knife a lot of durability. And when we dip it in acid, it reveals a beautiful clad line, which is called the Hamon line. Now, in the past, I've always taken my satinite and just applied it directly to the spine of the knife and given it a nice little mountain pattern on there. But what I've been doing lately is I've been trying this new technique where we are actually going to go ahead and wrap our knife here with steel wire. And I'm just going to go all the way down, as much wire as I have here. So we have our knife like that with all the wire on it. And then I'm going to go through with a pair of pliers and flatten the wire down a little bit, as much as I can. So now when I go and apply my furnace cement here on the spine of the blade, make it a little bit more watery, a little bit more like kind of a loose porridge, and we want to just go nice and slow and just kind of drag across. And that gives me these really nice high peaks. And I don't actually have to go through and make them myself. And I find this technique also has the added benefit of kind of just giving me a little bit more texture to my Hamon line. A little bit more waviness, a little bit more smokiness to it. Makes it a little bit more interesting than just a straight line or a wavy line. So I've got that side, and I'm just going to flip the knife over and kind of do the same thing on this side. Just apply a little bit throughout. And then just give it a nice rake. And then anywhere where I need more, just add a little bit more here. Make sure you've got plenty right on the back. And now we're just going to let that sit for a little bit and go start the forge. Got one I was working on. This guy goes in. $400 degrees for 1 hour. Alright, so the knife has been sitting in the oven for an hour at 400, and I just let it cool down. So now we're going to break off all of the satinite that's left on here and hit it on the wire wheel to clean up any forge scale. Well, unfortunately, we have a little bit of a problem. I found a crack. It's right down here. I don't know if I can show you if the camera will focus. Kind of hard to see. It's very small, but it goes up about 1/8 of an inch into the blade. Luckily, the crack's up here and not down here, so the easy solution is we're going to reprofile this blade just a tiny bit. Now, I've already approved this with Matt. He's okay with it. We're good to go. So what I'm going to do is grind that crack out completely, make sure there's not even a tiny little bit of it left to reprofile this blade. I'm also then going to stick it in my tempering oven at 400 degrees for one more cycle, just to make sure that if there's any tension left in this blade, it gets released. Now typically you want to do 2 cycles at 400. I only did 1 cycle at 400 with this knife so far. And the reason for that being, it's going to be kind of a skinning knife. It's not really going to be seeing a whole lot of hammering on, even though it is sturdy enough to do so. So I can get away with 1 heat treatment cycle at 400. Now, generally speaking, if you're more of a metallurgist, you always want to do 2 cycles, but I find that 1 cycle's fine. I've never had an issue. I've gone and taken knives that are even thinner than this, done 1 cycle, and absolutely wailed the hell on them and had no issues. In fact, this knife, I double checked and I hammered on a bit to make sure that there was no other issues with it. Looked very carefully to make sure there's no other cracks. And on top of that, our crack is up here and not down here. Now, if a crack is down here on a blade, you're gonna wanna just throw it out, because any amount of tension in here where it cracked, anything bad going on down here, this is where most of the force is going to be applied to your knife. So there's a very good chance, even if you grind that crack out, that there might be micro cracks down here that you want to get rid of. Now, I'm going to make sure there aren't any, and I'm going to do another temper, but I've already hammered on this knife quite a bit to test and make sure that nowhere else is going to crack. In fact, this crack didn't open up anymore, so I'm confident in just grinding this blade, making that profile a little bit different, and going from there. So I'm going to do all of that, and I'm going to get back to you guys, but there's a good lesson for you if you're a knife maker and your knife cracks. Good general rule of thumb: if it's out here and small, you can keep it. If it's down here, small or big, I'd recommend not keeping it. But hey, if it's a personal piece and you're willing to go for the risk, grind it out, clean it up, send it on its way. Alright, back to where we were. I've got that new shape ground out nice, and she's been tempered again, so we're gonna just keep grinding away and clean up the knife, get it nice and polished. I have the knife at 220 grit, and before I take this to 400 and then hit it on my buffing wheel, I'm going to go ahead and grind in my maker's mark as well as Matt's initials on the other side. Now, the reason that I do that now is if I wait and do it after I have ground this knife to 400, you get a lot of burrs from carving in the initials and whatnot. And those burrs will catch on the buffing wheel and have little like bits of fiber and stuff and just look ugly. So the best thing to do is to grind them in when you're at 220 grit and then clean everything off at the 400 grit. You also want to do it before the acid etch, so some acid gets in the grooves, in the carvings, and makes everything pop really nice. So there's my maker's mark. And there's the initials. Now we'll take it to 400 grit. Alright, so if you're familiar at all with how I do home own lines, the next step is to dip our knife in ferric chloride. First, I'm going to make sure that the knife is nice and cleaned off. We don't want any fingerprints or oil on there, because the acid will actually etch that into the blade itself. Just give it a nice quick wipe. We're going to stick it in the acid for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then you can actually just start seeing the home own line on here, but I'm going to go ahead and wash this knife off and go to our rubbing compound to clean off all the oxides, and you'll really be able to see the home own line starting at that point rather than me trying to show you now and getting acid all over the place. So I will be right back. Alright, so again, we are using number 7 heavy duty rubbing compound, and just get a little bit on our cloth and wipe our knife down here. And you can see that home own line. So now we're going to go ahead and just wipe off the other side, and then take it over to the polishing wheel and clean off any remaining oxides before we dip it in acid again. So there's that first etch, and we're going to go ahead and repeat that whole process 2 more times to get a really clean home own line with a lot of detail going on. So here's the knife after 3 baths in acid. Have a really nice, beautiful home own line going on. See if I can't show that to you. There you go. Absolutely incredible, beautiful home own line. Really love that new technique with the wire. Just have to be really careful you don't overheat the knife when you go to quench it. So, I have gone out on my own and made my little chunk, my little spacer piece of wood. Pretty straightforward and easy. Just cut out the shape I wanted, milled out a slot for the tang, and then I went ahead and glued it to the handle here, because the next step before we glue everything together and put a pin in the handle is to sand down my little piece of wood here so it matches really nice with that antler, and we have a really nice seamless transition between the antler and the wood. I also went ahead and I actually made a new guard. The old guard I had was a little bit too loose for me. In grinding, I ended up moving that shelf up just a little bit in the grinding process, and that caused the old guard to slide around too much, and I wanted a nice tight fit, and this guard actually fits even better and sits on there absolutely perfect and doesn't wiggle around like at all. So when we're ready to glue everything together, snaps in there, everything's nice and tight, guard doesn't wiggle around at all, and it's a really nice sized handle. Can really get a good grip on it. But again, we want that transition between the wood and the antler to look really good before we glue everything together, because once everything's glued together, it's impossible to do that without marring up your guard and having to repolish it and work around things, and it's just a nightmare. So it's easier to just glue your two pieces together, pull everything apart, and then finish this before everything gets smacked together. All polished up. Got our knife, our guard. Everything fits nice and tight and snug. So the next thing to do is to put a bunch of JB Weld epoxy in the handle, push everything together nice and tight, and then let it sit overnight to dry. Now it usually takes about 48 hours or so with the JB Weld on the inside for it to fully cure, but after 24 hours you should be able to go ahead and put an edge on the knife. But right now I wanted to hop over and do a little bit of work on the sheath. Now I'm not going to be doing a full video making the sheath, but I wanted to do a little bit of a tips and tricks segment for you guys here on some coloring. So here you go. So we're doing a pretty basic sheath here for this knife. We're not going to be doing any tooling other than I put Matt's initials here and my little maker's mark. But there was a technique I wanted to show off in regards to leatherwork, and that is how to do a little bit of a contrast, a little bit of a fade in your colors to make something that looks like this. And you don't need a lot of special tools or anything to make a sheath that looks a bit more interesting than just a solid color. All you need is some cotton swabs and your dye. Now I'm in no way, shape, or form a master leatherworker, although one day I'm sure I will be. But in the meantime, I have just some basic tools, some basic tricks and techniques to get you to take your leather sheaths from something basic and flat to something that has a little bit more going on. So, what I wanted to show off here is we start with a light brown dye. Now you can do this with any color, but I find light brown has the best contrast going for it. So I'm going to show you what we're working with here on a scrap piece of leather. And I'm going to show you why we do things the way that we do them. Now we start off with our light brown and get a nice coating all the way over our sheath or our pouch or whatever it is that we're working on. And we want to have a nice transition, again like this, with a darker brown going into the lighter brown. But we don't want it to look something like this. Because if we try and paint our edge just with our dark brown, we get these big flat lines, and it does not look pretty at all. In fact, unless you're able to get those lines completely straight, you notice it from a million miles away, and it looks absolutely horrible. So the way that we blend our darker brown into our lighter brown, take your cotton swab with your dark brown, go to a scrap piece of leather or the back of your sheath. In this case, the back of the sheath is going to be a dark brown, so I'm just going to start to color the back of the sheath. In this case, obviously our scrap leather, and then once you have most of that dye gone, there's still going to be enough dye in here where you're going to see it on the leather. So now, when you go back over, it's super light, and you get a really nice blend. Something like that. A lot more interesting than just our flat lines. You don't have to worry about getting them nice and straight. And it gives the sheath a little bit more of a pop to it than just a flat color. So again, I'm going to put this one to the side. Take our light brown dye. And I'm actually going to add a little bit more water to this. So if you need to lighten up your dye, just add a little bit of water. Don't overdo it, but as long as there's dye in there, it'll always stick to your leather. And I use 5-ings leather dye. I don't know how it works with other dyes as far as just adding water, but I've been doing this the whole time I've been making sheaths, and I have yet to have an issue. So if you need it lighter, just add a little bit of water. Make sure you mix it up nice and good. So you want to make sure that you just keep really rubbing in that color, making sure that you don't have any big streaks. I like to start on the edge with my initial contact with the leather, just to get the bulk majority of that color out, because it will always be darkest when you first touch the leather. And that way, if there's any streaking going on, it's more towards the edge where we're going to be covering than in the center of the leather, where you would see it and it would look like brush strokes. So you can also switch directions, kind of break up any kind of a texture going on. Alright, so there's our light. We'll put that away and go back over to our dark. And I'm just going to do the exact same thing I showed you on the test leather. And just start cleaning. Now the best thing I have found is to use a swab that you've been using a lot that has a bit of the dried leather dye in it. It doesn't absorb as easily, and that way you really get as much of that dye out of there as you can before you transfer over and do blend. So I'm applying a pretty good amount of pressure right along the edge just to get that really dark brown to start. And then as I transition further into the sheath, you want to just kind of release that pressure and just give it a really nice light brush stroke to really get a good blend going. But as I said, I like to go around the full length, just give it a good dark start, and then just lightly blend that color in. Now make sure when you're taking as much of the dye out of your swab as you can, make sure you keep rotating it so you don't have one side of the swab that has more leather in it or more dye in it than the other side, and you go to do this technique and you turn it just right and you get a nice big flat streak of black, and we don't want that. So just make sure you do a really good job turning it. So there we go. There's a good blend. And now I'm just going to finish off this side with the dark brown, and then we're going to let this sit and wait for it to dry, and then hit it on the buffing wheel, and I'll show you how that color really pops when we go and polish it up. we've got the sheath all nice and polished, and you can really see that beautiful contrast in the blending of color there on the edges. So the next step is I have bought a really awesome belt clip to put on this sheath. Usually I use Ulti clips. This is some other brand that was on Walmart. I wanted something with a nice big belt loop, something that's a little bit more tactical, and that's kind of what Matt wanted for this sheath, so this is what we're going with here. And so what I want to do is I want this clip to be as close to the top as I can, so we don't lose any of our form on our leather. And we have a nice backing for the back of the knife here. So I'm just kind of lining this up here where I want it to sit. And I'll make a little mark with my pencil. That's where our holes are going to be. I'll grab my punch. And I'm just going to make sure everything's lined up. Make sure these holes are where I want them to be. Now you want to make sure when you're doing any kind of a belt clip with rivets, you want to make sure that the absolute flattest side of the rivet is on the inside so you don't scrape your handle of your knife when you put it in and out of the sheath. So this one is nice. It comes with these little rubber washers that the screw will actually bite down and sink into, which gives you a little bit more protection against rubbing against your handle and scratching it up. So I'm just going to push these through here. Might need to make a bigger hole. I'll go for the next size up on the holes here. See if I even can. Nope. That's the biggest I got. So I'm just going to take it and actually go flip it over and punch again through the opposite side. And that'll open that hole up just a little bit more. So my screw slides in here and I don't have to worry about getting anything in the threads. Get a nice clean fit. And we'll just start this screw here if I can. Sometimes they don't make these things with nearly enough thread, so you really gotta get it started, but there we go. Alright. Find a screwdriver and just start tightening this down. Tight. Really getting on there good. And the way they design these is eventually it gets to a point where you can't tighten it down anymore, as the screw comes up through the bottom of the rivet there. So now I'm just going to go and do the other one, and then we're going to glue this sheath up, wait for it to dry, and then do our stitching. I'm going to do all that off camera, and I will get back to you probably once everything's just about done. I wanted to keep this video kind of short, get it out nice and quick, so Matt can see all the awesome stuff that we did with his knife, and also so I can get to some other projects. I've got a lot of commissions right now, and holiday season coming up and everything, so getting some inventory. But thank you guys for watching, and as I said, I'll be right with you for the sharpness test. Thanks for watching till the end. If you like this video, please hit that big like button down below. And if you're not already subscribed for some stupid reason, well, why don't you go ahead and hit that big subscribe button while you're at it. Links in the description below to my Instagram, Facebook, Etsy, and website. You can check out all the awesome knives I have up for sale on my website or on my Etsy. And if you want to see some more behind the scenes stuff here at the Forge, well, my Instagram and Facebook are the perfect place for that. Also in the description are links to Matt and the Meatball truck and all their social media. If you'd like something custom made like the awesome knife you saw me make here, especially coming into hunting season, you get a nice buck with an even nicer rack, well, reach out to me directly on any of the above mentioned platforms. And until next time, keep on keeping on.